up, everybody. No more sleeping in bed. No more backward thinking. Time for thinking ahead. The world has changed so very much from what it used to be. There is so much hatred, war and poverty. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Wake up all the teachers, time to teach a new way. Maybe then they'll listen to what you have to say. 'Cause they're the ones who's coming up.
All right, hello and welcome everyone to today's installment of our Leading with Justice speaker series. We're so excited to have you here today. We are on social media and we would love if you would share a favorite quote or a thought or idea with us today. You can tag it with the hashtag Leading with Justice. We are on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. Please share with us. Today we are going to be using two different areas, the chat and the Q&A. If you want to put audience reactions, technical questions, a quote, a thought, an inspiration for the day, all those can go in our chat area. And then if you have any questions for our presenter, please add those in the Q&A section. We're going to have a specific Q&A section at the end of today's talk. Today, if you can put your name and location, we actually have my PDF is going a little slow. We have a land acknowledgement we'd like to do. Legacies of soil and sovereignty. We express gratitude to the Nisenan people who are the first peoples and traditional stewards of these lands on which we live, work, and lean on. We acknowledge that much of the economic progress and development in the US resulted from enslaved African labor and the underpaid and exploited labor from immigrants. We honor the legacies of resistance of these ancestors and contemporary freedom fighters. And we ask our participants today if they can drop their location in the chat. If you happen to be able to hop onto this www.nativeland.ca, you can tell us exactly which native territory you reside in. And if you want to take it a step further, we also have a website down below that you can donate to. And with that, I would like to introduce our EDD faculty director, Dr. Vajra Watson.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited for today's Lunch and Learn. I am the proud faculty director of the Doctorate in Educational Leadership here at Sac State. It is my pleasure to welcome you into this space. We are building on the momentum from last year and are continuing to close the gap between theory and practice, between the world we want and the realities of today. A couple of weeks ago, during our Lunch and Learn, Lee Patel reminded us that learning is a fugitive act. Building on this idea, last week, Jarvis Gibbons dived into his new book, Fugitive Pedagogy, Carter G. Woodson and the Art of Black Teaching. During the discussion following his talk, Professor Amina Norris asked about connections between fugitive pedagogy and abolitionist teaching. Her question actually brings us to the intellectual precipice of today. We are honored to be bringing Dr. Kenjus Watson into the conversation to discuss a last call for apocalyptic education. What a title, a last call for apocalyptic education. We are in for some soul-stirring scholarship and truth-telling. As I've mentioned before, my close friend and colleague, Nicole Martinez, who teaches elementary school in San Juan Unified School District, told me that, quote, "Your walk is your way." Each of the scholars, school practitioners, and community organizers in our series embody this notion of walking with justice in their lives. So if you want to lead with justice, you have to walk with justice. As we continue to understand the why of justice, Dr. Watson will also illuminate the how of justice. Before we begin, I want to give thanks to our partners and sponsors. The Leading with Justice series occurs because of our support from the Sac State College of Education, SMUD, the Sacramento Kings, Fresno State's EDD program, and Sacramento Area Youth Speaks Says. Before we bring on Dr. Watson, let's bring in our very own Professor Alma Flores.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alma Flores, and I use pronouns she, her, hers, and ella. And I'm an assistant professor here at Sac State College of Education. And today I'm really honored and humbled to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Kenjus Watson. I met Kenjus when he came to present at Dr. Daniel Solorzano's UCLA Research Apprentice course, better known as the RAC. This had to have been back in 2012, shortly after Kenjus joined the PhD program that I was also in. And I think, like in many spaces, a lot of the students of color gravitated towards each other as a form of survival and solidarity, especially in a space that we often didn't feel we belonged to or were a part of. I found myself today in preparation for the talk looking back at pictures and emails of our time at UCLA, and I think one thing that I remember that stands out to me during my time at UCLA with Kenjus was the activism that we engaged in. Kenjus, myself, and a group of other students formed the group called Call to Action, and it was a group that of students of color, mainly students of color, graduate students of color, who came together to really address the racism, the sexism, and other forms of oppression that we were experiencing in our doctoral programs. We organized sit-ins, teachings, town halls, we wrote letters, reports, met with the dean, met with the chairs, to really address our concerns and call for some change in the program. And I think about this, that we did all of this while also completing our PhD. As a result of our actions, the School of Education now has a Dean of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And while this wasn't necessarily what we were looking for as a solution, I do want to highlight the work that we did, not only as scholars, but as activists during our time at UCLA. But really, I think what stands out to me during my time at UCLA with Kenjus was just how much love and support we had for each other, for our friends, for our colleagues during what was often a very challenging PhD program experience. We showed up for each other, we cheered each other on, and we definitely, I think, made time to celebrate all the milestones that you go through during your doctoral program. So I'm really happy to experience this full circle moment of introducing Kenjus now as doctors. So Kenjus is a son, a brother, a nephew, a cousin, an uncle, a father, and a partner who often shares space, energy, and dreams with radical educational communities. He aims to root and bridge this work in memories that attest to the inextricable link between the wellness of Black people and the abolition of school. Kenjus, thank you for sharing space with us today. I'm excited to learn with you. So to introduce Kenjus, here is his walk-on song.
It's time for me, it's time for me, yeah. Storms may rise and winds may blow. Seasons change and waters flow. Storms may rise and winds may blow. You never change, so I must go. Seasons change and waters flow. I'll take the lead.
Yay!
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sister Alma. Thank you so much, Sister Vajra, and everyone at Sac State who helped make this happen. This series is critically important. I'm just honored and humbled by the loving introduction, invitation, and to be here with you all today. As a quick aside, the track that we just heard is from Tiffany Marie, who is on this call, her incredible band, Artilia Green and the Bandanas. We heard Donda. There's a music video if you'd like to watch it on YouTube. And also Ayan's interlude. Ayan is the name of my daughter. So that's her voice there that you heard. I thought she did okay. You know, I told Tiff when she asked about Ayan, I said, you know, I can submit a verse as well to make it onto the album. And Tiff told me that she thought it was hard. But then I heard recently in an interview that she gave about this groundbreaking album that the reason it wasn't on there is because it was trash. And I just feel all kinds of ways about that. But that aside, we'll go forward. These gatherings are always a bit complicated for me. I never know what to do. Sister Alma mentioned this deep history that we have. What do you do when someone who you care for deeply offers kind and loving words about you to other people? It's a strange kind of place to be in. Like, do you nod in agreement? Yes, Alma's right. Like, I'm dope as she is, or close to it. Or do you disagree and say that you're not quite up to snuff of what the words are offered, or you just act surprised when they share your bio that you wrote, right? So it's a strange thing. Zoom is helpful, and this format's helpful because we don't come on until all of that is done. I also find that these talks are spaces are difficult, more recently being brought into them to discuss the work that myself, I mentioned Tiffany Marie, and others in our collective have been involved in, and the work of apocalyptic education. For some reason, talking about the apocalypse is not typically received as a joyous occasion. I mean, first, the piece that Tiff and I co-crafted on AE prior to the pandemic is roughly 53 pages long. Secondly, we were guided to frame it by Spirit as a funeral ceremony, a wake, wherein we bury the twin dead projects of schooling as well as Black people's hopes within them. So we remain really big hits at parties whenever folks ask us about the kind of work that we do. And in these kinds of spaces and more, they're challenging. My partner told me that I should do my best not to be a Danielle Downer, at least during the talk today. Lighten it up, she says, in response. I promised I would not go into detail about our unfortunate experience with a hopelessly racist bear in Pine Mountain, but I did tell her that lightening things up was holistically antithetical to the project of disrupting anti-Blackness. I also said I would squeeze in a minimum of 3 jokes, and 5 minutes in, I think that I have now reached my quota. So I hope everyone is feeling hopeful as we dive into the abyss of the apocalypse. So for the rest of the time here, I'm wanting to borrow a frame from my mentor that Dr. Flores and I share, Dr. Daniel Solorzano, who invites educators to talk about how we come to the work that we do. And so I envision our brief time together today as a last call. Literally, the bar is closing, right? And our ceremony is coming to an end. The funeral is packing up. The parade is moving forward, and the grief work is what's next. So there might be, if you imagine yourself at a funeral and the drinks are about to be done, a few questions really about what it meant to be in this space of mourning, who exactly has passed, how is it that we all are gathered here together? And so I'm gonna do my best to share my own history and understanding of the work before we leave this space today. So let me pull up the actual presentation and we'll get started. So a last call for Apocalyptic Ed. As I mentioned, my sister Tiff Marie and I put AE to virtual paper in the year leading up to the pandemic. We, in the preceding year at a community, we actually met in the preceding year at a community gathering that I held with Anthony Trochez and Johnny Ramirez as we discussed the findings of our dissertations with our family and friends. My research focused on the biopsychosocial impact of everyday anti-Blackness on Black men at UCLA. The study utilized telomere length, a biomarker of aging that really denotes how our bodies might be compromised by the process of aging, but even more so by exacerbated realities of stress or toxic stress. And so this study, which was done in collaboration with Rebecca Mendez and Dr. Leticia Marquez Magana at the Health and Equity Research Lab at SF State, was seeking to better understand any possible connections between Black men's recognition of the racism that they experienced and the long-term health effects of those experiences. So the first set of findings that we had suggested that Black students who recognized racism as a permanent fixture of the campus had more, or maybe as a short term, you might say longer telomere ratios relative to Black men who had a difficult time perceiving racism. Telomeres deteriorate as they as our cells divide, and so more telomere ratios you might have, longer your telomeres are, the more likely your cell is to continue dividing, and you won't go into senescence, and you won't, experience aging. So there's this finding suggested that the Black men who perceived the campus at UCLA and really the world itself as hopelessly and permanently racist, as anti-Black by default and foundationally anti-Black, would have these sort of relatively longer telomeres compared to those who were more likely to blame themselves for any racism they experienced. They had a more difficult time perceiving the racism. And they also had this optimism, right? This belief that hard work and achievement would help them overcome the effects of racism. I think that the more concerning findings were really about this. You can see the two groups here, right? Longer telomere folks said, yes, 99% of the time I'm experiencing racism, it's happening. Those with shorter telomeres, less than 12% of the time that they say that they were experiencing racism. But the more, I think, concerning findings showed that all of the men, despite these differences between their appraisals of everyday racism, were essentially being harmed and their health being compromised in ways that were similar to a group of breast cancer survivors who were 2 times their age. And so telomere length correlates with age and also correlates with disease. And so to have young men who were ostensibly healthy experiencing essentially, rapid aging and suggesting that might be, harming their or compromising their health long term was sort of what brought us to this space. And so what you're going to see is this video of Tiffany and I meeting, and she asked me shortly after I share these dissertation findings, what do we do? Because my suggestion after all of this to Black people at UCLA and really Black people in higher ed spaces throughout the country is, well, don't go to places that are harming you, right? And so you hear Tiff sort of push back on that.
Try to condense it to one. And that last question just threw me off because y'all will all 3 have degrees that hold validity and you'll be legitimized. And so I'm asking these questions as I'm in my final year of my doc program, really so that y'all can struggle with them so that when I'm up there, I don't have to. So I'm thinking about particularly in using biospecimen data, right? And we were talking about it. And I'm thinking about Toni Morrison saying that we shouldn't continue to explain. And so I'm wondering how you make sense of that and using this data to explain how we are dying.
Yeah.
But to also not have to keep explaining ourselves.
Yeah. So Tiff often jokes that I didn't answer her question, so I'm not going to show you my answer. She says that I wasn't really responding to it. And the question is twofold, right? It's why use biomarkers to tell us something that we know as Black people? Who are we talking to? Who's the audience? And if you caught it there at the beginning of her question too, was this crux of essentially how can you, Kinjis, also you see Brother Johnny and Anthony there, who have similar sort of suggestions. How can we, who are obtaining PhDs, terminal degrees in every sense of the word, speak about the overall harm of schooling or suggest otherwise for those who may be struggling to earn an associate's or a bachelor's? There's a kind of contradiction to be inside or even on your way to a certain kind of landmark while telling people that this is not the way to go. And so this question for me framed the basis of what I feel is a large part of the work of apocalyptic education of AE, in that AE is really grounded in this critical memory that we call it, right? And so the memory—
Try to condense it to one.
The memory here is that what we're trying to remember is that the ending of Western worlds, our relationships with Western worlds, the schooling within these places will grant more opportunities for Black wellness. So apocalyptic ed is also a transmission of African culture ways of being that conspire on behalf of our survival and autonomy, aimed at quickening our movement to spaces that are uninhabitable by those who mean us harm. In short, AE is a posture, it's a praxis, and a wellness collective of Black and Indigenous elders, youth, caretakers, educators, and other dreamers. So when we mentioned that schooling and our hopes within them were dead, in this process of grief and mourning and release, we're suggesting that it's necessary to go through this, right? This letting go of schooling. I think that my coming to this place of understanding did not begin with the work with Black students at UCLA. I would say I'd have to go back to the times when school didn't feel dead to me, the time when school felt most alive. And for me, when school felt most alive was when my mom suggested that it was her inability to do well in school, to succeed, that rendered our family more vulnerable to precarity, to violence, and to other forms of harm. My mom had fled domestic violence as a 16-year-old. She graduated from high school early, enrolled in the CSU system at Cal State San Bernardino in attempts to essentially become more autonomous and to survive. However, she didn't complete her BA, right? She didn't complete her BA. And this is a fact that she wore for much of my life like a mark of shame that needed to be exercised by me and my three sisters. I remember as a young child going through an event, a traumatic event, and asking my mom, why is this happening to us? Why is this the ongoing reality of our life? And her response to me, I remember clear as day, right? She said, it's because my parents, failed to graduate from college, failed to get a college degree. I didn't know what college was. I didn't know what that meant, but I was like, well, what could I do in my life going forward to not have these kinds of harmful realities impact me or my three sisters? And her response was, well, Kinjis, you need to work twice as hard as anyone else. You need to run fast and get A's, go forward by any means necessary, get a scholarship, go to college. You know, my mom enrolled us in a parochial school. It was a school for elite children in Riverside, California. She drove the bus for the school. She would watch classrooms while teachers had to go to the bathroom. She was a playground assistant, a classroom assistant, a janitor for times. My mom would show up some days just to see if there was any work that she could do that the school might then utilize to knock off the tuition, or maybe give us free tuition in all. And so she did that with the idea that there was this sacrifice of investment that would ultimately lead to more sustainability, health, and wellness for me and my sisters. And I think that many of us are likely familiar with this kind of story, right? If not this particular story, something like it, this generational belief in school, or what might be called education, as well as the shame inherent in the lack of access or achievement, the sacrifices, the climb, the fall, and everything in between. I think that apocalyptic ed is rooted in the memory that this merry-go-round, this carousel, is intentionally chaotic and parasitic on Black freedom, right? And Black dreams, that schooling, right, is intended quite literally to create further separation and distinction between African Indigenous people from our indigeneity, right? From our understanding of ourselves as blessings, from our cultural medicine, from our sacred purpose. That was the goal of schools. And that it emerges quite literally as a process of seasoning during and before and during the period of chattel slavery, enslavement. And seasoning, of course, is this process, this severe process of acclimating African people, indigenous people, to the climate in the Caribbean or the Americas, acclimating them to a diet, an enslaved diet, to a plantation diet, as well as the violence that was done to acclimate them in a sense of to the psychological reality of being not a fully fledged person, but losing one's personhood to objectivity, right? That you were no longer a being, you were instead an object for use of others. So we trace schooling to these roots, right? And seasoning was this process that was intended to turn African people into docile, enslaved people. And so the goal of school, right, during slavery and after, in its afterlife, was always to undermine the possibilities of Black rebellion. Will Watkins says in his book, White Architects of Black Education, that the elites took over education. And I know that we heard from folks, Dr. Gibbons and others who were speaking about the realities of disruptions to these attempts, right, to this program, to this blueprint. And we uplift those, and also the blueprint itself, which says that the point of education or school was to teach Black people to be obedient, compliant, order, capitalism, to create a comprador class within our groupings, to have people who would be higher striving and climbing, who would then manage anger and rebellion and pacify those underneath them, to promote conformity and values of capitalism. So schooling was intended to forego, foment, and undermine the possibilities of Black rebellion and anarchy. And eventually this was transferred to other groups, right? What was done to Black people, what was done to African people, turning them into Black people through school, was utilized as a kind of process that was trafficked around the globe. And that this work was intended to then move others into a space of pacification, cultural destruction, etc. So we argue that this logic, this plantation logic, is still very much in place in schools, right? And yet many of us are here on this call. I see about 40 people, myself included. We're here today at 12:30, precisely because despite the ongoing plantation logic, colonial logic of schools, we are invested in them, right? We have investments. I most surely would not be here without this very sincere investment. If I didn't go to Bethel, if there wasn't corporal punishment there, if I didn't get literally beat as a kindergarten student, I don't think I'm sitting here in front of you all. So we have this sincere, deep investment in schools, despite the fact that that we've been harmed, right? How would we know that a talk is taking place through Sacramento State without investment in schools? I know that there's a question, right, that we're asking us to sort of meditate on, why we are here, right? The investment may bring us here, but why do we remain? And how can I think at the point of Tip's question is, how can someone like me or her or others who are gathered here today, maybe card-carrying members of schooling, even raise such a question, the question of why we are here, why we remain here. And here's what I have sort of learned over the years working with our collective and kind of being grounded. You know, we have been wounded by I'll talk for myself. I've been wounded by my actual father. And in response to that, I try to put forward a different model of being a father, being a parent. So maybe some of us were wounded by our mothers or other caretakers. And so we try to transform our own practices to promote a different sort of way of being. I think that this kind of attempt applies to our work in education, right? Many of us have been wounded, or if we're not aware of the ways that we've been wounded, we might be aware of witnessed others who've been wounded by schooling, and we remain in many ways arrested, kidnapped, seeking to make sense of this abuse, to make it all have more meaning, to undo some of its sort of singeing nihilism, right? By invoking our greatest, most loving potential weapons, our memories, our hopes, our dreams and visions for the possibility of a future, to transform what is unjust into something that is more just, to try to make something that is inherently violent less violent, to make a space that has been holistically predicated on harm into a place of healing. And I'm not suggesting that, and I don't know if others in the collective would suggest that any of those attempts by those of us who find ourselves as caretakers, parents, folks grounded in schooling or in education spaces, however you want to frame it, that those efforts are not worth and have not been worth the 300 years of blood, of sweat, of sacrifice, of tears, quite literally by many of our ancestors, to try to transform these spaces, or the work that we do today of trying to have in the words of Dominic Christina, have our words become a machete, right? Or a thesaurus to become gasoline, right? Or our publications to become the sort of warning shot to any and all possible harms of threat of harm, that we would do something that is so seemingly contradictory. We don't think that it's not worth it. I think what we're suggesting is that there might be other projects that are maybe more worth that effort. And I want to kind of shift a bit to thinking about the work of abolition. Abolition in all of its forms, particularly will uplift the work of prison abolition, right? It is really seemingly focused. There's like a cultural zeitgeist. All of a sudden, abolition is I was talking about this with Tiff the other day. Abolition is it's cool, right? You can say it, it's all right? But even when we say it, we're still talking about dismantling, literally undoing. For thinking about prisons brick by brick, the institutions that house our children, that house our families, and this intense focus makes sense, right? Our people are suffering, our children are suffering, our families are really having a difficult time coping underneath what is an intergenerational, at this point, war tactic. of incarceration against our communities. So close the prisons, close them now, yes. And what I also appreciate about the focus of some abolitionists is the embrace of whatever creative modes may be available to bring people home. The courts, sure. Finding loopholes in the law, of course, right? Dismantling blockades to more freedom by advocating for policies that do away with cash bail, right? Shifting policies in other ways, doing art programs, suggesting that there is a possibility of education that would then make currently incarcerated individuals more likely to become not incarcerated in the future, bring people home, and in some cases, incarcerated person-centered and initiated hunger strikes. In the case of more than a few revolutionaries, even armed insurrection, literally by any means necessary. And so it's powerful to see those creative expressions. And the fulcrum of the arguments regarding prison abolition really may swing this way or that based on methods, means, tactics, even strategy. But the fact of prison as the target of abolition is not typically up for debate. I'll say that again. The fact of prison as the target, the thing that needs to be dismantled, and all the things that go into it that need to be dismantled, is not typically up for debate, usually. Whereas school as a general good, or even if we stop using that word and say, well, education that happens within schools or the building, et cetera, as a portal to better, however we may conceive of what better is, still feels, and many times very much on the table, even in our most, and maybe especially in our most critical of spaces. And so I think that Brother Stovall is helpful here as this other project that gets us beyond understanding schools as anything other than that which must be completely dismantled.
Right, so now if I'm thinking about this in particular ways, I'm always thinking about what Michael Dumas often referenced as fugitivity. Now, he borrows this from Black radical queer feminism, right? So folks like Sadia Hartman, Hortense Spillers, who are talking about another sister named Christina Sharp, right? What they're talking about is this idea of understanding that something is not right. And you've made a decision that because something is not right, you're going to move someplace else. You're going to do something else, right? So fugitivity is not running from something. Michael Dumas always says that fugitivity is the understanding that you are not yet free, but you have made a decision to run. You are not running from something, you are running to something. The most important thing to understand is that you are running to that thing with the people who also understand that something is wrong. And in your fugitivity, you are willing to build something because you have made the decision to run.
So Simple Ant defines fugitivity as abolition by way of abandonment, right? And if we can agree, as Brother David Stovall mentions here, that that we are not yet free, right? Then it may be past time to move away from what has been and what is to something that maybe was before and really that something will need to be. Here's the thing, because I have been supported in coming to understand Blackness as the silly putty of the world, in that whatever is deemed as Black can and will be utilized as the foundational clay or putty or Play-Doh or play stuff for any and every villainous, benign, or pleasurable fantasy that non-Blacks can dream up. I've come to know that there is no sacred Black position that, if shared, will remain sacred for very long, right? So the meaning of terms like abolition and fugitivity lose ground. Their power loses ground each and every time people like me, or maybe especially people who are not like me, use them in spaces particularly like this, that's part of how this whole thing is structured. That's also the work of schooling, right? To track on to what the resistance is, have that published, studied, and then really preempted, undermined, right? Indeed, like, what does it mean for me to be sharing with you all about any of these concepts on a machine that is quite literally powered, right? Talking about abolition, upending, fugitivity, anti-Blackness, using a device that is powered literally by precious metals that have been mined by dead and dying Black children in the Congo. So there's this move to do something else than to allow fugitivity like other frames, abolition like other frames, to become something that it was not intended to be. So Stovall will say, what are we, not only where are we running from, but what are we running to, right? What are we running from and where are we running to? So recall that schooling is an appendage of the state. It's premised on reproducing anti-Blackness. We've discussed this as a sort of pyramid scheme where our place is by default and necessity the bottom. I'm talking about Black people here. And there can be no down, there can be no up without a down, there can be no down without an up, right? So it is tempting to, in many ways, tie our freedom dreams to the moving up the pyramid. As I've heard in other spaces, like what was so powerful about some of the covert methods of fugitive teachers in the 1700s, 1800s is the curriculum that they were teaching in their labs was different than what they had to teach on the desk, as Brother Gibbons mentioned so beautifully. That was beautiful work. And yet the strategy for today, right, as far as fugitive work, might still be about trying to move, in many ways, move us up. So the better that we want more of us to have, this is a better that we want more of us to have access to. But the problem with any pyramid scheme is that there can be no up again without a down, regardless of who is positioned where. So suggestions like are being passed around today about how do we get more of us into higher places are kind of missing, I think, some of the reality of this structure that we find ourselves in, one that was intended and now is kind of running automatically. And so we understand that we are not currently free, and we will not be more free when and if we get higher in a hierarchy, right? We will not get more free when we get higher in a hierarchy. So this is the California Master Plan of Education, Higher Education, that was developed in the 1960s here on the left, where they envisioned that about 12.5% of the state's children, high school graduates, would attend the UCs and become the sort of leaders and managers of the states. 33.33% would go into the CSU system and be sort of mid-level, mid-tier managers, and then teachers, et cetera, sort of white collar professionals, not quite elite status, and then 100% would gain access into the time, the junior colleges. This is really a framework that bakes in hierarchy, and it bakes in by just amount of sheer number, certain amount of positions for those who are leaders and those who are doers, and we'll say those who are laborers and those who are non-persons. This is also the same kind of model that T.S. Eliot of Harvard put out into the world, and really what gave us the system of grading that we have today. On the right, you see the actual enrollments of high school graduates into California-based higher education. Private, not meaning private for-profit, those are places like where I teach at Occidental, Harvey Mudd, Stanford, and the like, right? So it's quite literally a hierarchy. And when I look at this, I see the ongoing realities of the lack of movement, but I also see, unfortunately, right, my own life and truth fixated onto this. These are my three sisters, right? My eldest, Micah, all the way to, I guess, my left over there, my second eldest, Chandra, and then my baby sister, Carrie. And so my mom, had this idea about, again, us obtaining access into higher ed to provide us more freedom. And here's sort of how we shaped out. So I attended Occidental, Carrie attended UCLA, Micah, various CSUs, before eventually graduating from a for-profit school. And Chandra has been in and out of community colleges throughout this time. So for us, this is not, you know, I don't believe, and I don't think my sisters would see this as a kind of overall boon for our life. I think what this is instead is a way that the very mapping that the state intended, it goes all the way back to that seasoning process, has been put quite literally into my flesh and blood in our home. And so what do we do about this as we sort of wrap up here? And I asked my mom at the end of the dissertation what she would now offer as far as what to do, given that things have shifted so much in our life. And she's seen the outcomes of the dissertation study with telomeres. She's seen this very truth in our own family's life, and the way that school has not sort of, schooling did not provide the salvation for us. And so I'm gonna kind of show what my mom said. So when I asked her, you know, Mom, what do we do about this? Mom, what did you say?
There was, you know, I thought that there was something we could do to change our condition, you know, to protect you and your sisters. But what I've learned and what I know now is that bringing you into the world was like bringing a piece of paper into a burning forest fire, you know, and I'm trying to protect you, but you're paper and you are actually a part of, you know, you're a component of a tree. These people who came before you, that's what you are. But all of the trees, the entire forest is on fire. And I'm saying to myself, you know, what was I thinking? I mean, there are these great moments with the paper, you know, with you all, when I can read you and I see the amazing universe you all contain and are capable of bringing into existence. You know, the paper's your true value and your true worth. And then there are times where it seems like that paper is just going to catch on fire and burn up and be gone right out of my hands. Just like that, just like that. And I've had so many of those moments. Seeing this place burn you, scar your sisters, it's changed me. I'm forever changed.
Well, I asked my mom then, you know, given this and the fact that we are, you know, at the point of obtaining degrees, what she would say or how she would update her advice. And what did you say then, Mom?
I tell you what, if I knew back then what this place was, I would have tried to move as far away from the system as possible. And it's really difficult because, you know, the whole world is based on that fire. And it would be difficult to find a place that's not burning. That's how the world runs. It's like an unforgiving fire. It just consumes everything. It consumes hope. It definitely consumes Blackness and Black people. You know, Blackness is a commodity. Did you know that, Kendis? Did you know that? Is there a book about that? You know, like Blackness is a commodity. Well, there ought to be. It's like the more the world is in touch with each other, the more they find out that they all agree that Black people are a commodity and should be consumed by fire, by the flames. It's like the more they find out, the worse it is for us. You know, there was a time when white people didn't even know Africa existed before they found us, you know? There should be a book called Before They Found Us.
You're right.
Sounds like, yeah, that sounds like a romance for the ages, doesn't it? But the truth is, I'm really hopeful for Micah's kids and for your kids, and when you have them.
Why would you be hopeful for our kids given everything that you just said?
Well, because I'm guessing because of your knowledge, you know, you and Danielle and all of you, you're really woke. You're really woke. Oh.
You were saying that we're really woke.
Are you there? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But because you guys are woke like that, I'm hoping that that'll change something. You know how white people always like to say that they're woke? Well,
Sure.
I don't know what that means. But for us, I think it means that knowing that racism does exist and that the world is on fire. And since you already know that, as you're having, your children, maybe you'll be able to figure out how to get your children through the place without getting as burnt as you were. Maybe you'll get your children as far away from, get as far away from this hell as possible and encourage other Black people to do so. And maybe after your children won't be as burnt as you were. And the next generation will be further away.
Yeah. Well, we'll see, Mom. Thanks for joining in and reproducing the interview that we did. The truth is that I asked my mom these questions. I asked her these questions at the end of the dissertation, and she offered us a framework for a really important component of apocalyptic education, and that's about leaving or exiting. And so much of the work that we are attempting to do is about how do we leave, but also what do we dream and create in its stead, right? What be the other ways of doing? And so to that, I think I look to the work of Ya Tiffany Marie, whose collective of educators up in the Bay were really about this process of not just leaving, but reestablishing the connections to ancestral wisdom, to the natural world, a balance of mind, body, and spirit health, prior to any sort of conversation necessarily about telomeres, but one that definitively transformed the telomeres of the young people that she was working with. And we used that kind of thinking to engage the young men that I was working with as well. But telomeres, or we'll use the Yoruba term for them, right? Awan eya apari, in parts. They shouldn't be necessary for us to move towards this place of more right relation. And so apocalyptic ed is kind of centered around these projects, and that's how I come to it, right? Through my mom, my grandma, my sisters, the deep relationship I have with Ya Marie, with my own family, my daughter, who are telling me constantly, these Black women, Black queer folks, constantly that this is not it, and we need to move towards something else. So I'll end there. I know I'm a little bit over. We may not have as much time for Q&A, but just want to thank you all so much for engaging. And thank you, Mom, for joining us today, even though you weren't necessarily sure what this was, what the hell we were doing here.
No, I still don't, but thank you for having me.
All right.
All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, Mom.
Thank you so much, Kenjis. Thank you to your mom. We want to open it up now for Q&A. If folks have questions, you can go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we will go ahead and send them to Kenjis. I do have a question here, Kenjis, and it kind of ties into the last slide that you shared with us. What do you think the land and our bodies can teach us about abolition?
I'm sorry, I don't know, you said the land and
the
what?
land and our bodies. What can they teach us about abolition?
The land and our bodies. We are the land. You know, our bodies are the land. I don't know if y'all hearing me or not, but we have all the components that the earth, that our mother is. We are made of the same components. We are of her, of this place, and I think that as people tried to, what do they call those original crops, the wheat, right? They called them basket cases because they needed constant attention and manipulating back, I guess, 10,000 years ago, at the advent of civilization. I think that was kind of a wrong turn, you know, to think that, as Robin Wall Kimmerer would say, right, that the land owes us. And so much, I think, of our work, if something owes, you feel something owes you, then they become indebted, and eventually that's like a slave, right? It's a slippery slope to that place. And so I think that just like the idea of the soil, which is life, life-giving, like the womb, which is dark and life, the idea of Black people being this sort of kind of parable of the antithesis of life, I think it's very much aligned. I think the earth is our, they are our kin, they are our family. As they are free, we are free.
Yeah, thank you, Kanjus. I think someone spoke to it a bit in the chat, but I really like how your talk is very intergenerational. You're speaking with your mom, you're speaking with other folks in your family. I'm wondering what else your elders or folks in your community have taught you about abolition work and how it informs your work or how they inform your work.
My root worker, Andy, I don't think Andy identifies as an elder, but Andy's the first person who told me to mind your business. You know, so this process of refusal to me was sitting in the chair, having the sister do my locks and telling me how important it was for us to mind our business. I think our doula, the person who helped bring Ayan into the world, Cindy Bonaparte, told us really about paying attention and how clearly that word has so much meaning. Where do you pay attention? You know, and they're desiring our attention. They want it, and that makes us want more attention. And so I get these kinds of really important and critical groundings from these people that are our community. My grandmother tells me that nothing has changed in her life, right? Which, you know, my grandma's never heard of Derek Bell, but I think they'd get along. She's 85. Her grandmother was born into slavery, and my grandma told me in 2016 that nothing had changed between her lifetime and then. And so I hear her speaking really the words of her grandma. So that to me says my ancestor, my elder who was enslaved, is telling me today, which I should be telling my daughter and my son and people going forward, we are in the same thing. Logics remain. Mechanics and logistics may have shifted. So those are really important ground for me.
Thank you, Kanjus. And thinking about your work too, and so for example, in the Latinx community, we often talk about how educación and education or schooling don't necessarily mean the same thing. I'm wondering what you think the difference between schooling and education are, or if there is a difference, and how do you define it in your work?
We in the work we do collectively, we uplift the work of Shuja, who has a book called Too Much Schooling, Too Little Education, 1994. And he delineates it in the first chapter there, right? Schooling is this process intended to reify the status quo and uplift the power elite, whereas education is the process of transmitting cultural knowledge, intergenerational grounding and wisdom, aesthetics, all that give a particular culture its vitality. And culture, taking from Dr. Barbara Sizemore, who I heard this from Dr. Lamont Terry, she says culture are the ways of being that emerge from a people group that are centered on their survival and autonomy. So to me, I don't know the difference, Alma. Like, schooling is the attempt to overwrite our survival mechanisms, our ways. That's what education is. It's a transmitting of survival and autonomy. So schooling is this outside force that is attempting to overwrite those by doing its own form of education, giving us its cultural kind of remnants of survival and autonomy. And the thing about school is that it's parasitic. It needs a host to not be in a place of survival and autonomy in order for it to move. So I think that's a major difference for me.
Thank you, Kanjus. We are at 1 o'clock. I just want to hand it over to Vajra to kind of close us out. But thank you again so much, Kanjus. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
Wow. So this talk had me getting out my seat, jumping up and down. I hope that you can also experience the chat box, because not only was just your PowerPoint and your points like so, poignant and like mind-blowing, but having your mother in the midst and just, people say like, oh, out the mouth of babes, but I'm like, man, out the mouth of moms, because the analysis that she brought, and what she's calling forth, especially for us that try to be and walk this way of woke scholarship, to talk about, because you're talking about being woke, and an analysis of the fire. Please extend our gratefulness to her directly for being in the space. So thank you to you. And I just want to welcome everyone to come back tomorrow. We will be back here for Leading with Justice from 12 to 1 with Dr. Casey Wong. He's going to be talking about his 2021 article in AERA's Review of Research and Education entitled The Wretched of the Research, Disenchanting Mantu as Educational Researcher and Entering the 36th Chamber of Educational Research. You haven't read the article, it's basically where Wu-Tang and Sylvia Wynter come together, and it will dovetail magnificently with what we just talked about today. So join us, continue to engage and innovate and elevate in education, and have a beautiful day. All right, everyone, take care. Thank you.
Peace and blessings to you all. Take care.
Yes.
Thank you.
Peace.